this is Marina from Dark Star Astrology, and I'm bringing you a kind of study of Pluto through the signs because it's very much a generational planet. And I only kind of thought about this really because of I was doing a little bit of research before my interview with Robert Phoenix, and he mentioned talking about the generations and Pluto in the signs. So I started having a look, and I kind of got into it a bit more than I thought I was going to. So I thought, hang on, this deserves a YouTube all to itself. So I'm going to do that. Now, Pluto in the signs doesn't neatly correspond with the supposed generations. Now, I'm assuming that you've kind of heard of, the boomers and Generation X and the millennials. I mean, they're really kind of used as terms now. So I thought, is there any relation between those and Pluto being in the signs? Now, unfortunately, it doesn't sit perfectly within the sign. It's what happens is you get a kind of crossover and overlapping. What is interesting, though, is that with using sidereal, the overlap with what is sidereal and what is tropical actually fits quite well. So let's go through it and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to make a post where I have all the notes down so you can kind of see it chronologically. It's a lot easier to sort of see it visually than it is as I speak it. But I will try and put some images onto the YouTube video. So the first one is the silent generation, and Wikipedia has this as going from 1928 to 1945. So obviously it's the war years. And now this stretches from 16 degrees of Cancer to 10 degrees of Leo. But really, sidereally, it is Gemini Cancer. So Cancer is what is common to both systems. And I think it really does encapsulate the Pluto in Cancer, what that would mean. Now, before we actually go into this, I think I'm going to do all of the outer planet signs in generations and talk about what it means. Now, for Pluto, we really are concentrating on the controllers. I think Pluto represents the hidden hand, so to speak, the people you're not allowed to criticize, cunning, mystical magic, possibly Freemasonry. I'm not quite sure about that yet. But it is secret. It's secret controllers, not people that you can really see. So, and it's politics. It's power politics. So when I look at Neptune and Uranus, I think that might be a different thing. But Uranus probably is good for studying wars and revolutions. And Neptune, probably music and media. But Pluto, I think, is a kind of good general hidden hand of power here. So Pluto in Cancer, well, this is what they say. This is what they categorize as the silent generation. And you see, Cancer is really about, it is family and what makes you secure. And I think it is quite tribal as well. So it's not surprising during this time. I mean, the First World War was also with Pluto in Cancer, but it doesn't count as the silent generation because that starts at 1928. But I did make a list of the stars that were happening at this time as well. And Castor and Pollux, the Gemini twins, were featured in this generation as well. And we start with Castor. From 1929, 1930 was when Pluto was roughly, because it overlaps and it goes retrograde on Castor. And Castor was the good twin. And normally it gives distinction, success in law, many travels, sudden fame and honour. But then it can be a great loss, success followed by loss of fortune and disgrace, sickness, trouble and great affliction. So this could sort of signal the start of the divisions that were starting to form that brought about the Second World War, which I think is one of the biggest, most important, I don't know, maybe it's the most important turning point of human history. It's, I suppose, of course, I wasn't even born then, but it's still very close compared to something like the Trojan War or something that happened back in ancient history. I think it's what's been very instrumental in changing the whole course of the West and where we are today. So I think it was a great big sorcery spell as well. Very dark forces, but in ways, not the most obvious ways. The obvious ways, yes, but also unobvious ways and hidden ways as well. So then 1931 to 1934 is when Pluto was on Pollux, and you're kind of getting double darkness here because Pollux is supposed to be the evil twin as well. And he's actually known for speaking out about taboo and dark subject matter as well. And during this time, Hitler kind of rose to power as well. So, and in the beginning, he was seen as a bit of a savior for Germany. And so it's kind of interesting to see. I think he was even on the cover of Time magazine around that time too. So things did flip over quite strongly. But I don't want to get into a whole thing about Hitler, but just interesting the coincidence of Pollux being there. Then 1934 to 37, Pluto was on Procyon, which is also in Gemini. And this is known as oh no, it's not in Gemini. Sorry, it's in the little dog, the barking, yapping dog. And he is also known as the announcer star, and I think this is the time really where TV wasn't widely seen yet, but the technology for all of that was being developed, and we had the radio and we had movies. Hollywood was starting to be used, I guess, as a propaganda tool, and advertising as well. All this started coming up around this time, and so this is radio propaganda, Pluto on Procyon. Then Pluto actually does enter the sign of Leo 1939, so this is the cusp of World War II. That's when it started, so that's kind of interesting. And then we don't really get Pluto on any major star until 1941 to 45, and where it's on Precipice, which is a star cluster, and the Chinese call it the spirit of the ancestors, but it's also known as the beehive cluster as well. It's in Cancer the Crab, which is of course Cancerian archetype as well, even though it's now Pluto's actually into Pluto. But as I said, we get the overlap of the sidereal with the tropical here. But yeah, it's got a bit of a hive mind mentality to it. So during the whole war, everyone was very tribal. Everyone kind of stuck with their tribe and to fight evil, really. And you could see it very strongly then. So now this is the definition of the silent generation that I found in Wiki that I thought that stood out really. It says it's unclear where the term originated, although it is widely accepted that the term comes from focusing on careers over activism. And as you have to remember that although these people were born in these times, they came of age really during the 50s. So during this time, the young adults then, you could see the difference to the baby boomers, because the 50s generation, the 50s parents were very traditional. You could see it, just looking at them, that the man was a man, the woman was a woman, and it was, they did focus on careers and building a home. And Wiki puts it as focusing on careers over activism. But, that's because they had responsibilities of a family, and they grew up in tough times where there was rations. So everything they did was they were thinking of the future. They were conserving for the future, and they were looking after their families. But also it says that young adults during the McCarthy era, many of them felt it was dangerous to speak out. Now, the McCarthy era is one thing which is kind of a bit weird in a way, because it's always portrayed as a bit of a kind of Nazi time where everyone was outing somebody as being a communist. So, but the thing is really and truly, McCarthy had a point, because what he was trying to do was flush out who would later be the propaganda machine of Hollywood. So actually, I think Stefan Molyneux did quite a good video about this. So if you want to research a bit further, obviously, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it's good to see the other side of things, because whenever I heard about the McCarthy era, it just sounded really awful, where America was. It's kind of portrayed a little bit like this in, the what is it? The Man in the High Castle. They all look very sort of 1950s-esque, traditional families. Everyone's very rigid and really unhappy, and the women are just chained to the kitchen and under their patriarchal husbands. And it just seems really, it's always portrayed as being a very grim time, where I think they were actually... it was actually seemed like quite a lovely time to me. So, and also, actually, there is another way of looking at this generation, and they've also been named the Lucky Few in the 2008 book, The Lucky Few, which is between the greatest generation and the baby boom. And the author Carlson notes that this was the first generation in American history to be smaller than the generation that preceded them, because they were born during the Great Depression and World War II. And then they moved into adulthood during the prosperous 1950s and the early 60s. So you can kind of see the overlap with Leo, in the sense that there are, stars there. But it's mainly Cancer. And I think Pluto in Cancer is very much that kind of 1950s image of the power family, really. And I suppose when you think about it, because there were 2 world wars then, they needed to really hammer home the importance of protecting your tribe, protecting your family. Nationalism, it's to do with the family, it's on a wider scale. So this generation grew up with be loyal to your tribe and the hive mind as well, and respecting the ancestors and what you're going to leave for your children. So that's all Pluto in Cancer. So that's why the 50s still, they couldn't just switch over to family's not important and degeneracy like that, could they? So because they grew up with that kind of mentality, and women are women and men are men, that kind of thing. Very polarized with the opposite, which is Capricorn. Capricorn patriarch, soft maternal mother is Cancerian. So there you go. But then we come to the baby boomers. So according to Wiki, the baby boomers go from 1946 roughly to 1964, and there's some saying it's 66, and some actually no, they say the latest is 65, but I think 64 is just before. There was still a very feel of it being kind of more like the 50s, and then 65 was the flip over year, and you could see with the Beatles as well, they were starting to get kind of into marijuana, and you could see drugs kind of seeping in, but that really wasn't until 65. So until 64 we have this very still kind of Apollonian energy, because it's Leo. Pluto in Leo is the sun god, and kings and looking up to, respecting authority, really, still up to then. Now then Pluto does go into Virgo for some of it, so but you'll see, we'll go through it. And first I will read out what Wiki says baby boomers are like. So as a group, they were the wealthiest, most active and most physically fit generation, and the first to grow up genuinely expecting the world to improve with time. They were also the generation that received peak levels of income. They could therefore reap the benefits of abundant food, clothing, retirement programs, and sometimes even midlife crisis products. The excessive consumerism of this generation has often been criticised as excessive, and in the West, the baby boomers were the first generation to grow up with the television as well. So Pluto in Leo, the star. The boomers have tended to think of themselves as a special generation, very different from preceding and following generations. In the 1960s, as the relatively large numbers of young people became teenagers and young adults, they and those around them created a very specific rhetoric around their cohort and the changes that they were bringing about. Well, yeah, I mean, there was power in teenagers, and you could see that all the marketing, because there were so many of them, was aimed at being young and groovy, and they were lucky too. So these lot, the ones born around 48, 50 is Doobie, which is the mother bear. So there's still kind of remnants of the 50s kind of feel there. Then, now this is interesting. Then we get 1955, Pluto's on Alphard, which is the snake, Hydra the snake. So there you get sort of poisons, and the snake is also forbidden fruit, it's temptation. And I think that's maybe the people born in 55 were very strong in influencing the sexual revolution, the drugs. I'm not sure if Timothy Leary was born then, but you know, you can see where that might have had roots. Then 56 to 58, Pluto on Regulus. I mean, this was when Elvis Presley came to the fore, and of course he's the king, and he was the first to start rousing teenagers into that kind of hysteria because of his, you know, shaking his hips. And then it matured into the whole Beatles thing. But before then, you know, teenagers didn't exist, and they were really just mini parents, and they straight away, you know, got married and had the responsibilities of a family, which was the silent generation were more like that. But these lot, they could be reckless. They could let their Dionysian passions overtake them, really, and they did. Now, this is what's interesting, though. We get Pluto into Virgo in 1957. So it starts to... The people that were born then are starting to kind of not be so boomerish, even though they still count as boomers. I think... Because, as I said, you know, the baby boomer generation, sidereal-wise, it's still Leo. So I still think it's got that kind of Leo overlay on top of Pluto in Virgo. And also what's interesting is that the baby boomer time, it's sidereal, Cancer and Leo, and those are the summer months. So it does feel like a bit of a peak time. You know, the war's ended, there's loads of work for people to rebuild, and everyone's celebrating. So it's definitely summertime. But what is also interesting is that 1961 to 64, Pluto's on Zosma, which is the lion's back. It's not generally regarded as a fortunate star. It has a kind of victim savior kind of energy about it. And that's when Kennedy was shot, and then the Beatles came to prominence. And there's a lot of theory that the Beatles were kind of manufactured to take people's minds off the fact that their president had been shot. I mean, this is like killing the king. And whatever you may say about Kennedy, I do think he may have been someone who was Catholic for a start. Not that makes him a wonderful person or anything, but I wonder about that. You know, the first Catholic president, and then he gets shot, and there was, you know, rumours that he was going to do something about the banking system, which is, you know, going to get you into trouble, isn't it? So, yeah, maybe the plutocrats, they were responsible for that, and he became the victim and the scapegoat, or, you know, the blood sacrifice that was needed to herald in the whole of the 60s, which I used to think was such an amazing awakening time. But it wasn't. I think it was hijacked. I think it could have sincerely been that, but I think people were drugged out of their awakening, and this awakening was seen to be because of the drugs. But I don't know. You know, just look up Laurel Canyon and go down that rabbit hole, and then you just think, oh my God. Yeah. So, I mean, that would take, again, you know, this is something I want to do as a separate thing to look at, the whole Beatles thing, Paul McCartney, everything to do with that. But I just think it's interesting that 61 to 64, we get the victim savior, and the Beatles kind of saved or took people's mind off the fact that the king was shot. So the baby boomers, as I said, yeah, they were the wealthiest. Some examples, here we go, of these baby boomers are, and you can see they are well in with the whole Matrix system. Steven Spielberg, Tim Burton, Quentin Tarantino, Meryl Streep, oh God, her and her virtue signaling, Whoopi Goldberg, Robin Williams. Now this is interesting. Trump, Clinton's, Bush as well. All those. Now, Trump is so much a boomer. I mean, he's just boomer deluxe, really. But so are the Clintons, and they are two sides of the same coin. It's really interesting because he's the overt narcissist, while the Clintons are the boomers who are trying to seem like they're, you know, saviors. You know, they're the kind of Zosma savior kind of thing, where we're saving all these people, we're doing all this for charity, and so they're boomers on the other end of the scale of boomer, and being worthy. And same with Madonna as well. I mean, she's quite brash and Leo-y on one side, and very kind of Trumpish and overtly narcissistic. But then she has all this kind of secret side where she's doing stuff for charity and adopting babies from other continents, and anyway, trying to virtue signal with that. And so you got the two sides of it. And also during this time, you kind of got the super pop star, you know, like, yeah, there's Madonna, there's Michael Jackson as well, and David Bowie. They were all like super solo artists, and Prince as well. And then Bob Geldof and Sting, you know, Bob with his Live Aid. I mean, that's another sort of, oh, I really want to help the unfortunate, and I'm such a wonderful person for doing it. Please worship me, Sir Bob. He got knighted, didn't he? So yeah, you know, they're all part of the funny handshake brigade. So that's the boomers, and I think they're very, very much Pluto in Leo. Oh, just to mention as well, my parents actually weren't boomers. They were born just on the cusp of it, really. They were silent generation. But my cousins, I've got my younger aunties and uncles are boomers, and they worked so hard, actually. Maybe they don't count as boomers because they were immigrants, but they can't understand why my cousin just cannot save tons of money and build a property portfolio like they did, because, you know, property was cheap then, and we didn't have you could just go from one job to the other, and even though they were immigrants themselves, there wasn't a glut of it, you know. It was still a small amount, so they can't really understand that. So us poor Generation X people, and then as it goes on, you'll see it just gets worse and worse for each generation that comes along. So the boomers were really the last to get the best out of, I suppose, capitalism, because then they hadn't really, it was the start of immigration, and it was the start of multiculturalism, but labour was not being exported to, you know, outside. The factory work was still there, the manual labour was still there, and also you could work and have, you know, you could have a stay-at-home mother as well. You didn't need double income to pay a mortgage either. So they just don't get it, and a lot of these boomers who are now in power, they just don't get it, really. And especially the ones who are in Hollywood, they're in such a bubble, and they think they just don't know what it is like to live in the real world. So you know what? I think I'm going to cut it off there. So put it into easy bite-sized episodes. So yeah, that was the boomers and the silent generation. And in the next one, I will talk about Gen X and the millennials. And then I think I'll do a separate one for Gen Z and what may be the next generation after that. So we'll do it in 3 parts, I think. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next generation.